The road narrows before it ends. You may not have noticed when it happened. Exactly when the asphalt gave way to gravel, when the gravel softened into a dirt track worn smooth by years of sea wind and quiet footsteps. But somewhere along the way, the world you had come from began to feel very far away. The noise of it, the weight of it, all of that had begun to dissolve like mist burning off in the morning, leaving behind something quieter and older and more real. You follow the path as dusk deepens into a soft indigo haze. To your left, the sea. You can hear it before you can see it clearly. A low rhythmic murmur, patient as breathing, rising and falling against the stone below. The waves are gentle tonight. They speak in long, unhurried syllables, drawing themselves up and pulling back again and again in the language that the ocean has been speaking since long before anyone was here to listen. It is not an urgent sound. It asks nothing of you. It simply continues as it always has, as it always will. The air is cool and carries with it the particular freshness of a coastal evening. Salt and stone and the faint sweetness of some low-growing coastal herb you cannot name but feel you have always known. You breathe it in slowly. You notice how your shoulders drop. You notice how your jaw, which you did not realize had been clenched, softens. You let the air in and you let something else out. Something you have been carrying perhaps without knowing it. Ahead of you, the cliff rises gently. Gulls circle there, 3 or 4 of them, turning slow arcs against the sky. Their cries are distant, softened by the wind, and they seem less like disturbances than like signatures, small marks the sea makes in the air to say, here, this is the edge. This is the place where land becomes sky, becomes water. And then you see it. At first, it is only a shape against the fading light, a dark cylinder rising from the headland, set against the last pale wash of sunset in the west. But then, as you walk nearer, the lighthouse begins to resolve itself into something more specific and particular. Stone, you realize. Old gray stone. The kind that has absorbed centuries of wind and salt and moonlight and given them back in a certain quality of permanence, a certain steadiness that no new thing possesses. The lighthouse stands the way very old things stand, not rigidly, not defiantly, but with a settled confidence, as if it has long since made peace with the permanence of its purpose. The light has not yet come on, but soon. The sky is still holding its last pale colors, lavender and dusty rose in the west, deepening to a soft dark blue overhead, where the first stars are beginning to appear. You can see them now, just barely, as if they are waking gradually, finding their places. The lighthouse waits for darkness, as you do. There is a kinship in that, and you feel it. A lantern hangs at the gate of a low stone wall that surrounds the lighthouse and a small keeper's cottage at its base. The lantern burns steadily, its warm amber light falling in a gentle circle on the path. It is the kind of light that says, you are expected. Come in, rest now. The gate stands open just a little, as if it has been left so on purpose. You push it gently. The hinges do not creak so much as sigh, the way old things sigh when they've been doing the same thing for a long time and have come to find comfort in repetition. The path inside the wall is of smooth, flat stones, set into the earth, each one worn slightly in the center from the passage of boots over many years. Small, low-growing plants push up between them. Time, perhaps, or something similar, giving off the faintest herbal scent when the wind catches them. The cottage sits to one side of the lighthouse base, modest and square, with thick walls and small, deep-set windows from which warm light spills out onto the ground. You hear, rather than see, him first. A door opens. The sound of it is unhurried. Footsteps on stone. Slow, even, the footsteps of a person who has nowhere else to be and knows it. Then, a figure in the doorway, outlined by the golden interior light. An old man, not tall, with a weathered face and white hair, lifted at the temples by the evening breeze. He wears a heavy wool sweater the color of storm clouds, and he stands in the way that people stand who have spent a great deal of time outdoors, easy in their body, acquainted with stillness. He sees you and smiles. It is a slow smile, the kind that begins at the eyes. There is warmth in it, and something quieter than warmth, a kind of recognition, as if he has been expecting you, though you cannot think how. "Ah," he says. His voice is low and unhurried, roughened a little by sea air, but gentle. "You found your way then?" "I think so," you say, and realize as you say it that you are not entirely sure which way you have found. To the lighthouse? Yes, but perhaps to something else as well. Some quieter place inside yourself. The old man nods, as if he understands this perfectly. "Come in out of the wind," he says. "I have the kettle on." Those words, simple as they are, settle over you like a warm blanket. You follow him inside. His name, he tells you as he moves about the small entrance hall, is Edric. He has kept this lighthouse for many years, so many that when you ask, he pauses for a moment, counting in some private way, and then laughs softly and says, "It doesn't matter exactly. Long enough that it feels like home," he says. Long enough that he has stopped thinking of the sea as separate from himself. The entrance hall is low-ceilinged and smells of wood smoke and something pleasantly herbal, dried lavender perhaps, hanging in a bundle from one of the old iron hooks. By the door, there are boots lined up with care and a row of coats in various stages of use and weathering. A barometer hangs on one wall, its needle pointing gently toward fair. Everything here is orderly and worn smooth with use and comfortable in the way that only well-loved things become. You remove your coat. You hang it on a hook. You breathe. From somewhere deeper in the cottage, the kettle begins its low building song. Through the entrance hall window, now that the light inside has lit the evening darker, you can see the beam sweeping out across the water for the first time. White and slow and immense, moving across the face of the dark sea, like a thought crossing a quiet mind, the lighthouse has come alive. The night has found its purpose, and you, standing here in this warm, small hall, with the smell of wood smoke and the sound of a kettle, and the knowledge that the sea is just outside and going nowhere, you feel something that you have not felt in a long while. You feel perfectly, completely still. "The light always settles something in me," Edric says from the next room, as if he has read your thought. "It did the first time I saw it, all those years ago. It does still." You move toward his voice, toward the warmth of the fire you can hear now crackling softly, toward the amber glow that spills through the doorway like an invitation. Outside, the beam sweeps and sweeps. The waves continue their ancient conversation with the stone below. Somewhere out on the water, a foghorn sounds, low and long and full of a tenderness you hadn't known a foghorn could have. It fades. The waves continue. The beam sweeps on. You are here. You are safe. the edge of the world turns out to be exactly the right place to rest. Part 2, the lighthouse keeper's home. The cottage is small, and it is everything. That is the first thing you understand as Edric leads you through the low doorway and into the sitting room, that a space can be small and still contain multitudes. That walls, if the right things have happened within them over enough years, develop a kind of warmth that has nothing to do with the fire, though the fire helps. It crackles in a wide stone hearth at the far end of the room, unhurried and generous, casting its amber light across everything it touches and making everything it touches look like something from a memory you almost have. You stand for a moment in the doorway and simply look. The floors are old wood, darkened with age and use, smooth underfoot in the way of floors that have known many years of quiet footsteps. They creak very softly as Edric moves across them. Not an alarming creak, but a settling one. The sound of a house that knows you are here and is acknowledging it. A woven rug in faded blues and greens covers the center of the room, its pattern worn to something gentle and almost abstract, like a map of a sea that exists only in dreams. Along one wall, floor to ceiling, books, not arranged for show but for use, some standing upright, some leaning, some lying flat as bookmarks for the others. Their spines are a long, slow conversation of colors: deep red, sea green, the brown of wet sand, the cream of old paper. Some have no titles you can read from here, worn away by the handling of years. Others you can just make out charts, tide records, natural histories of coastal birds, the memoirs of captains and navigators, collections of poetry, a great many novels with a particular softness of books that have been read more than once. Between the books, tucked into the shelves like small, quiet treasures, a large conch shell, its interior a faded rose, a glass float, pale green, the kind that used to travel on fishing nets, a small brass compass in a leather case, a piece of driftwood worn by the sea into something almost sculptural, 3 or 4 smooth stones in colors that could only have come from this particular shore. You feel, looking at all of this, that you are reading a life. Sit, sit, Edric says, gesturing toward one of the 2 armchairs by the fire. They are old chairs, wide and deep, and upholstered in a fabric that has faded from what might once have been burgundy to something softer, the color of a rose, pressed in a book and kept for years. The cushions have molded themselves over time to the shapes of the people who have sat in them, and when you lower yourself into one, it receives you with a kind of considered ease, as if it has been waiting for exactly someone your size and weight and wariness. You sink in, you let out a breath. The fire speaks quietly to itself in the hearth. From the kitchen, a small room off the sitting room, partially visible through an open door, come the sounds of Edric moving about, the soft percussion of a cabinet opening, the gentle clink of ceramic, the low song of the kettle beginning its work again. The sounds are unhurried. They are the sounds of a person who does not rush anything, who has learned, or perhaps always known, that things happen at the speed they need to and no faster. You look at the walls. Between the bookshelves, where the plaster shows, there are charts pinned or framed. Nautical charts, you realize, old ones with the particular beauty of things drawn by hand, their lines marking depth and current and shoal and safe passage. They are faded to the color of old linen, their ink brown where it was once black, their edges soft. One very large chart takes up much of the wall to the left of the fireplace, and you can see this coastline on it, the headland, the bay, and somewhere on the headland, a small symbol marking the lighthouse. Marked, you notice, in ink slightly darker than the rest, as if it has been gone over more than once, as if someone wanted to be sure it was there. On the mantelpiece above the fire, a wooden clock, ticking with a deep, unhurried voice. A small painting of the lighthouse in a silver frame. Daytime, summer, the sea, very blue below it. 3 candles in different stages of use, the wax soft and dripped into comfortable puddles at their bases. And in the center, a large nautilus shell, its chambers catching the firelight and holding it in spirals that go inward and inward toward some still, unreachable center. Edric comes through with 2 wide ceramic mugs and sets, one on the small table beside your chair. The steam rises from it in slow curls. It smells of something warming, honey and ginger, and something herbal beneath, chamomile perhaps, and something else you cannot name, but that smells like it belongs to evenings at the edge of the sea. Careful, he says, it's hot still. He settles into the other chair with a slowness that is not infirmity, but ease. The ease of a person who has sat in this chair 1,000 times and knows exactly how to do it. He wraps his hands around his own mug and looks into the fire for a moment in silence. And the silence is entirely comfortable, the kind that needs no filling. Outside, the lighthouse beam sweeps. You can see its passage faintly through the small window beside the fire. A brightening and a fading and a brightening again, slow and steady as a heartbeat. How long have you been here, you ask, when the silence has rested long enough that speaking feels natural. Edric considers. He has the unhurried quality of someone who gives every question its due weight. I came here when I was 32, he says at last. I had been a sailor before that, merchant vessels mostly. I knew the sea from the deck, but I wanted to know it from the shore. He pauses. It's different, you know. From the deck, the sea is something you move through. From here, he glances toward the window, toward the sound of the waves. It's something that moves through you. You hold your mug with both hands and let the warmth travel up through your palms. You take a small sip. It is still very hot and sweet and gentle, and something in it immediately begins to do a quiet work somewhere behind your sternum. A loosening. The lighthouse, you say. How old is it? Edric smiles at the fire. She was built in 1847, he says. And there is something tender in the way he says it, the way some people speak of very old things they love. The original light was oil. Whale oil at first, then later paraffin. There was a keeper here every night in those days, 2 of them usually, sharing the watches. The light had to be tended through the hours, the oil replenished, the lens cleaned, the mechanism wound. He looks up at the ceiling, in the direction of the tower you know rises just beyond these walls. She's changed with the times, electric now, and mostly automatic. But I still keep the old logs, still maintain the schedules. Some things shouldn't be left entirely to machines, I think. There is a long, easy pause. The fire settles with a soft sound, a log shifting, a constellation of sparks rising briefly and going out. From somewhere outside, you cannot tell exactly where, a gull makes one slow, sleepy cry and then is quiet. The waves continue their work below the cliff. The early keepers, Edric says, with the quiet pleasure of someone turning to a favorite subject, were extraordinary people. Imagine it, months at a stretch in a place like this, just you and the sea and the light, the loneliness of it. But the records they left, the logs, they don't read like loneliness mostly. They read like people who had found something, a kind of clarity maybe, a sense that what they were doing mattered, that the ships moving in the dark out there were safer for their presence. He looks at you. There's a great deal of peace to be found in that, I think, in a purpose that is simple and clear and genuinely good. You find that you agree, though you are not sure you could have said so in those words before tonight. The fire burns lower and softer. You drink your tea in slow, warm sips. The ginger has settled into a pleasant warmth somewhere in your chest. Outside, the beam sweeps and sweeps. You notice that you have stopped counting your worries, that they have not so much disappeared as receded, like the tide pulling back to reveal the clean, smooth sand beneath. Edric tells you about the winter storms, not with fear in his voice, but with a kind of respectful wonder, the way you speak of things that are larger than you and always will be. He tells you about the seabirds that nest in the cliff below every spring, the way they return to the exact same ledge year after year, finding their way home across thousands of miles of open ocean. He tells you about the ships he has watched pass, their lights moving slowly across the dark water, and how he has thought about the people on them, going somewhere, and felt a quiet goodwill toward every one. The cottage holds all of this. The books hold it. The charts hold it. The fire holds it and gives it back as warmth. At some point, you could not say exactly when, you realize that your eyes have grown heavy, not unpleasantly, in the way that eyes grow heavy when the body at last believes it is safe, when the nervous system puts down what it has been carrying and says, here is enough. Here we can rest. Edric notices the way he seems to notice everything, quietly, without making much of it. The guest room is just at the base of the tower, he says, setting down his mug. I've made it up. There's a window that looks east, over the water. He pauses. You'll hear the light turning. Some people find it takes getting used to. Most find they sleep better for it. He leads you through a narrow doorway and into a short passage that curves slightly. You are entering the base of the lighthouse itself now, you realize. The walls here are stone and thicker, and they have a coolness that is not unpleasant. There is a low wooden door, which he opens, and beyond it, a small room that is nearly round, as the lighthouse is round, with a ceiling that follows the curve of the stone walls. The bed is narrow and high and covered with quilts in the blues and whites of seafaring things. There is a small window, round as a porthole, as he said, looking east. Through it, the night sky, and just at the edge of vision, the faint, pale line where sky meets sea. Sleep well, Edric says, and his voice is low and warm and certain, the way voices are when they mean what they say. He pulls the door closed behind him. His footsteps move back down the passage. Unhurried, you sit on the edge of the bed. The quilts are cool and soft under your hands. The lighthouse beam sweeps outside, and through the porthole window, its light moves briefly across the ceiling. Once, and then the room is dark again, and then again, slow and even and rhythmic as breathing. You lie back. The pillow is soft, the quilts are heavier than you expected, and exactly the right weight. The sound of the waves comes through the stone walls, muffled and deepened by the thickness of them, so that it is less a sound than a feeling, a vibration at the very base of things, a rhythm the world keeps with or without your attention. You close your eyes. The light sweeps once more across the ceiling. The sea breathes below. You're held here in the old stone between the land and the water, in the keeping of the light. Part 1. The Candlemaker's Window. The fog came early to York that morning, as it so often did in the weeks before Christmas, settling upon the ancient streets like a soft woolen blanket drawn up by invisible hands. It crept along the worn cobblestones of Stonegate, curling around the corners of timber-framed buildings that had stood sentinel for 300 years or more, their upper stories leaning companionably toward one another across the narrow thoroughfare, as though sharing whispered confidences in the gray dawn. In the stillness before the city properly woke, before the clatter of cartwheels and the calls of merchants broke the silence, there was only the muffled sound of footsteps here and there, a baker making his way to his ovens, a lamplighter completing his rounds, extinguishing the gas lamps one by one, as the pale winter light began its slow ascent behind the cathedral towers. And there, halfway down the street, in a building no wider than 2 windows and a door, a single point of golden light pierced the fog. It glowed steadily in the window of a small shop, warm and constant, as though it had been burning all through the night. The light caught the frost that had formed on the outside of the glass, transforming each crystalline pattern into something precious and delicate. It illuminated the painted lettering above the door, letters that had faded somewhat over the years, but could still be read by those who knew to look. Halbrook and Son, Chandlers, established 1823. The "and Son" had not been true for many years now. Inside the shop, the air was thick with the sweet honeyed scent of beeswax mingled with the faint smokiness of tallow and the clean sharpness of new cotton wick. The walls were lined with shelves from floor to ceiling, and upon those shelves stood candles of every conceivable size and shape. Tall tapers for dining tables stood like soldiers in their wooden boxes. Squat, sturdy candles for lanterns nestled in rows. Delicate votives, no bigger than a thimble, weighted in paper wrappings. And larger pillar candles, substantial and serious, occupied the middle shelves with an air of quiet dignity. The single candle that had been burning through the night stood upon the counter near the window, its flame steady and unwavering, despite the drafts that found their way through the old building's many cracks and crevices. It was not an especially large candle, nor was it particularly ornate. It was made of good beeswax, pale gold in color, with a simplicity of form that spoke more eloquently than any decoration might have done. As the church bells of York Minster began to toll 6 o'clock, their deep voices rolling across the rooftops and chimney pots, a door at the back of the shop opened, and an elderly man emerged into the golden half-light of the workshop. Mr. Edwin Halbrook moved slowly, as befitted a man in his 73rd year, but there was nothing feeble in his movements. He carried himself with the careful precision of one who had spent a lifetime working with hot wax and open flame, where haste could mean burnt fingers or ruined work. His hair, what remained of it, formed a silver halo around his head in the candlelight. He wore a wool waistcoat over his shirt and an apron, much mended and bearing the stains of countless candles, was already tied about his waist, for he had put it on before even making his tea, as was his habit. He paused for a moment in the doorway, allowing his eyes to adjust to the dimness, though he knew every inch of this room as well as he knew the lines of his own hands. Then he moved forward into the shop with the quiet confidence of long familiarity. His first task, as it had been for more years than he cared to count, was to unlock the front door. Not to open it, that would come later, when the fog had lifted somewhat and the street had fully awakened, but simply to unlock it. It was a ritual, a way of telling himself that the day had begun, that the night's solitude had ended, and that the world, with all its small necessities and gentle rhythms, was ready to receive him once more. The key turned in the lock with a soft click that seemed loud in the morning quiet. Mr. Halbrook returned to the counter and began the work that had shaped his days for as long as he could remember. He took up a small pair of scissors, their handles worn smooth by decades of use, and began trimming the wicks of the candles that would burn in the shop that day. Each wick required attention. Too long, and the candle would smoke and sputter. Too short, and the flame would drown in melted wax. It was a small thing, this trimming, but Mr. Halbrook had long ago learned that the world was built of small things done with care. Snip, snip, snip. The sound was rhythmic and soothing, punctuated only by the gentle settling of the building around him and the distant call of a crow somewhere beyond the fog. He worked his way along the counter, then to the shelves, lighting candles as he went. Not all of them, that would have been wasteful. And Mr. Halbrook was not a wasteful man, but enough to fill the shop with a warm, welcoming glow. He used a long taper for the purpose, lighting it from the candle on the counter and then carrying the flame carefully from wick to wick. As each new candle caught and bloomed into light, the shop transformed. Shadows retreated into the corners. The grain of the wooden shelves became visible, rich and warm. The brass scales on the counter gleamed softly. And in the window, the candles arranged for display began to glow like a constellation of small earthbound stars. Mr. Halbrook stepped back to survey his work, as he always did, ensuring that the shop looked as it should. His eyes traveled across the familiar landscape of shelves and stock, of tools and materials, of the accumulated evidence of a life spent in quiet making. And then, as his gaze reached the highest shelf on the wall behind the counter, he paused. There, slightly apart from the others, stood a single candle. It was not the largest candle in the shop, nor the most beautiful, though it possessed a beauty of its own, a simple, unadorned pillar of pale beeswax that seemed to hold the light with interest. Mr. Halbrook could not have said with certainty how long that particular candle had been there. Years, certainly, perhaps a decade or more. What he could say, what he had noticed season after season, year after year, was that it burned longer than any candle had a right to burn. He had lit it, of course, many times. When the shop grew particularly cold, or when he worked late into the evening and needed the company of light, and it burned as any candle would burn, with a steady golden flame. But it never seemed to diminish, or if it did diminish, it did so with such exceeding slowness that the change escaped notice. The candle stood at the same height, maintained the same dignity of form year after year, as though time itself had agreed to pass it by. Mr. Halbrook did not dwell on this mystery overmuch. He was not a fanciful man. The world, in his experience, contained enough genuine wonder in the way light moved through wax, in the precise moment when liquid became solid, in the mathematics of wick and flame, that he felt no need to invent more. If the candle burned longer than seemed natural, well, perhaps he had made it especially well. Perhaps the wax had been particularly pure, the wick particularly true, or perhaps, and here a small smile touched his lips, perhaps some mysteries were content to remain mysterious, and that was perfectly acceptable. He turned away from the high shelf and moved to the small window at the back of his shop, drawing aside the curtain to look out into the yard beyond. The fog was beginning to thin, just slightly, and he could make out the shapes of the neighboring buildings, the dark line of the wall that separated one property from another, the bare branches of the tree that grew in Mrs. Pemberton's garden next door. It would be a quiet day, he suspected. The fog would keep many people at home, but there would be visitors nonetheless. There always were. Someone would need candles for their church. Someone else would want a good light for reading. Perhaps young Thomas from the bookshop would come by for the tapers he preferred for his late night studying. Mr. Halbrook returned to the front of the shop and settled himself on the tall stool behind the counter. He had an hour, perhaps, before anyone would knock at the door. Time enough for a cup of tea. Time enough to watch the morning light strengthen. Time enough to simply sit in the company of candlelight and silence, two things of which he had never grown tired. The candle on the counter continued to burn, its flame painting slow, wandering shadows on the ceiling above. Outside, York was waking. Somewhere, a door opened and closed. Voices called out greetings. The city was remembering itself, shaking off the night's dreams, preparing for the day's work. But here, in the small shop on Stonegate, time moved differently. Here, the day began as it always had, with light chasing back darkness, with small rituals performed with care, with the quiet knowledge that some things, warmth, welcome, the steady burning of a good candle, remained constant in a world much given to change. Mr. Halbrook drew a breath, feeling the warmth of the shop settle around him like an embrace. Outside, the fog would lift. Customers would come, work would be done. But for now, in this moment, there was only the gentle glow of candlelight, the sweet smell of beeswax, and the peaceful certainty of another day beginning as it should. The candle on the high shelf, the one that burned longer than it ought, remained where it had always been, keeping its quiet vigil, holding its small mystery close. And in the window, the golden light continued to shine, a beacon for anyone who might be walking through the fog, a promise of warmth and welcome in the gray December morning. Part 2. Wax, Wick, and Quiet Hands. The morning tea had been drunk, the cup rinsed and set aside, and now Mr. Halbrook turned his attention to the work that would occupy the greater part of his day. In the room behind the shop, a space that served as both workshop and storeroom, the tools of his trade awaited him with the patient silence of inanimate things that know they will be needed. He moved through the narrow doorway, ducking his head slightly, though the passage was tall enough, a habit formed over long years when his back had been straighter and the world a fraction larger. The workshop was smaller than the shop itself, but it possessed a completeness that the front room lacked. Here was where the true work happened, where formless wax became light, where the alchemy of his craft transformed simple materials into something useful and good. The table that dominated the center of the room bore the marks of decades of labor. Its surface was scarred and stained, darkened in places where hot wax had spilled and cooled, lighter in others where his hands had worn the wood smooth through endless repetition. Along one wall stood shelves holding blocks of beeswax, their surfaces dull gold in the dim light. Beside them, wrapped in cloth, were stores of tallow, less expensive, less fragrant, but necessary nonetheless for those customers whose purses could not stretch to beeswax. Mr. Halbrook ran his hand along the edge of the table, a gesture of greeting, of acknowledgement. Then he set about preparing his workspace with the methodical care that had become second nature. First, the fire. The small stove in the corner needed tending, its embers from the night before stirred to life and fed with carefully chosen pieces of coal. Not too much. The heat must be steady and even, not fierce. Wax was a delicate thing, for all its seeming solidity. Too much heat, and it would scorch, turning bitter and dark. Too little, and it would never properly melt, remaining thick and unworkable. He worked the bellows gently, coaxing the fire to a steady glow. The warmth began to spread through the small room, chasing away the morning chill that had settled in the corners. Mr. Halbrook could feel it on his face, on his hands, a warmth that spoke of work about to begin, of purpose about to be fulfilled. While the stove heated, he selected the wax he would work with today. His hands moved over the blocks with assurance, choosing 3, all beeswax, for he had an order to fill for the cathedral, and they would accept nothing less. The wax was cool and firm beneath his fingers, its surface slightly rough. He could smell it even before heating, that characteristic scent of honey and summer meadows, of flowers and industry, and the patient work of bees. He broke the blocks into smaller pieces using a broad-bladed knife, the wax fracturing along natural lines with satisfying cracks. The pieces went into a large copper pot, one that his father had used, and his father's father before that. The pot was burnished to a soft glow, its bottom darkened by years of heat, its handle wrapped in leather that had molded itself to the shape of hands, now long since. Still, Mr. Halbrook set the pot on the stove and watched as the wax began its transformation. It happened slowly, as all good things do. At first, nothing seemed to change. The pieces of wax sat in the pot, apparently impervious to the heat below. But if one watched closely, and Mr. Halbrook always watched closely, one could see the moment when the wax began to surrender. A faint sheen appeared on the surface of the pieces. The edges softened, grew rounded, and then, almost imperceptibly at first, the solid began to flow. It melted from the bottom up, turning liquid gold, pooling in the base of the pot, and slowly climbing the sides of the pieces that remained solid. Mr. Halbrook stirred gently with a wooden paddle, helping the process along, watching as piece after piece yielded to the heat and became part of the whole. The smell intensified as the wax melted, sweet and warm and infinitely comforting, filling the workshop and seeping through into the shop beyond. It was the smell of his childhood, of watching his father work, of learning that patience and attention were worth more than haste and force. It was the smell of countless quiet mornings, just like this, one of work done well, of craft practiced with care. When the wax was fully melted, Mr. Halbrook removed the pot from direct heat and set it on a trivet to cool slightly. Wax that was too hot would not hold a wick properly, would burn the cotton and make for a poor candle. It needed to cool to just the right temperature, hot enough to coat and penetrate, cool enough to begin setting almost immediately. While he waited, he prepared the wicks. They hung in bundles from hooks on the wall, long strands of braided cotton, clean and white and ready. Mr. Halbrook took down a bundle and cut it into lengths appropriate for the tapers he would make today. Each cut was measured not with a rule, but with his eye, an eye that had made this judgment so many thousands of times that it no longer required conscious thought. His hands simply knew. He arranged the cut wicks on the table, laying them out parallel to one another, straight and neat. Disorder in the beginning led to disorder in the end. And Mr. Halbrook had no patience for disorder, not from irritation. He was not an irritable man, but from the simple understanding that his craft deserved better. Outside, the fog had lifted somewhat, and through the high window of the workshop, a pale gray light filtered down. It mingled with a warmer light from the candles he had lit earlier, creating a soft illumination that was neither holy daylight nor holy candlelight, but something in between, a gentle diffused glow that seemed to suit the quiet work of the morning. Mr. Halbrook tested the wax with one finger, pressing lightly against the surface. It was ready. That particular warmth, that particular consistency, these were things he knew in his bones, knowledge accumulated through years of daily practice until it became instinct. He took up the first wick and dipped it into the wax. The process was simple. Lower the wick into the pot, immersing it completely. Lift it out. Wait. The wax that coated the wick would cool and harden, creating a thin layer, then dip again and again and again, layer upon layer, each one adding infinitesimal thickness, each one building toward the final form. Dip, lift, wait. Dip, lift, wait. The rhythm of it was hypnotic, meditative. There was no rushing this work. Each layer needed time to cool before the next could be added, or else the accumulated wax would simply slide off, wasted. So, Mr. Halbrook dipped in rotation, working his way through the dozen wicks he had prepared, giving each its turn, returning to the first just as it was ready for another layer. His hands moved with the unconscious grace of long practice. The wicks dipped and rose, each time emerging a fraction thicker than before, the wax building up in smooth, even layers. Slowly, so slowly that the change was almost imperceptible from moment to moment. Thin string became slender candle. The work left his mind free to wander. Though it never wandered far, memories drifted up like smoke. His father standing at this very table, his hands performing these same motions. His own younger self, learning the craft, impatient at first with the slowness of it, the repetition, gradually coming to understand that the slowness was the point, that the repetition was where the quality lived. He remembered the first candle he had made entirely by himself. How proud he had been, how his father had examined it with serious eyes before nodding once. A single nod that had meant more than 1,000 words of praise. He remembered winters, when the demand for candles was so great that he and his father had worked long into the night. The workshop warm despite the cold outside. The two of them moving in companionable silence, the work creating a bond that needed no words to strengthen it. The rain began while he worked, so softly at first that he didn't immediately notice. It was only when the sound registered, a gentle pattering against the window, a whisper against the roof, that he looked up and saw the water streaking the glass. A winter rain, cold but not freezing, the kind that would turn the streets to mud and keep sensible people by their fires. The sound of it was pleasant, a quiet accompaniment to the work of his hands. Inside the workshop, all was warmth and light and the sweet smell of beeswax. Outside, the gray afternoon grew grayer, but it seemed distant, separate, a different world entirely. Dip, lift, wait, dip, lift, wait. The candles were taking shape now, growing from thin tapers to something more substantial. Mr. Halbrook's experienced eye judged their progress. A few more rounds, perhaps, and they would be ready. Not too thick. These were meant to be elegant, refined, suitable for the cathedral's altar. Too thick, and they would look clumsy, inappropriate. He continued his work, his breathing slow and even, his movements steady and sure. There was no part of him that was elsewhere, no portion of his attention that wished to be doing something other than what he was doing. This was enough. This had always been enough. The workshop settled into a stillness, broken only by the sound of the rain, the occasional crackle of the fire in the stove, and the gentle dripping of wax back into the pot as each taper was lifted. Time seemed to soften, to stretch, to become less a series of distinct moments and more a continuous stream, flowing quietly onward. Mr. Halbrook's hands moved through the wax and through the air, dipping and lifting, creating beauty through simple repetition. His shadow on the wall behind him moved in rhythm, a dark companion performing the same patient dance. And slowly, gradually, the candles approached completion, each one a small testament to the value of careful work, of attention paid, of craft honored. The rain continued to fall, the afternoon deepened, and in the warm, wax-scented workshop, an old man's hands continued their ancient work, as they had done yesterday, and the day before, and would do tomorrow and the day after that. Dip, lift, wait, dip, lift, Wait, the rhythm of making, the rhythm of living, the rhythm of a life well spent in the quiet creation of light. Part 3. The Bell Above the Door. The bell above the shop door was a small brass thing, tarnished with age, but still possessed of a clear, sweet voice. Mr. Halbrook had hunted there himself when he was still a young man, newly inheriting the shop from his father, wanting to put his own small mark upon the place. Over the years, that bell had announced thousands of visitors, and its sound had become so woven into the fabric of his days that he sometimes heard it in his dreams. It rang now, just as he was hanging the finished tapers to complete their drying, its gentle chime cutting through the quiet of the late morning with a sound that was more greeting than interruption. Mr. Halbrook wiped his hands on his apron. Though they were quite clean, this too was habit, and made his way from the workshop to the shop. Through the doorway he could see a figure silhouetted against the watery light from the window, a shape he recognized even before features became clear. "Good morning, Mrs. Ashworth," he said, his voice warm with genuine pleasure. A wet day to be out and about. Ashworth was pushing back the hood of her cloak, revealing a face that bore its 70 years with grace, the lines around her eyes and mouth speaking of a life well lived and much smiled through. She was a small woman, neat in her movements, and she had been coming to Mr. Halbrook's shop every Tuesday morning for longer than either of them cared to precisely remember. "Good morning, Mr. Halbrook," she replied, her voice carrying the particular warmth reserved for old friends. Wet indeed, but one cannot let a little rain dictate one's schedule. The week would fall to pieces entirely if one did. She was the schoolteacher at St. Mary's, had been for 40 years, and she brought to all aspects of her life the same gentle discipline she brought to her classroom. Mr. Halbrook had always admired that about her, the way she moved through the world with purpose but without hurry, accomplishing much through steady application rather than dramatic effort. "I suspect your pupils were not quite so philosophical about the rain this morning," Mr. Halbrook said, moving to help her with her cloak. Mrs. Ashworth laughed softly. The younger ones arrived looking like a collection of drowned mice, all complaining most dramatically. But they settled soon enough once we began the day's lessons. Children are wonderfully resilient creatures, though they do enjoy a bit of theatrical suffering when the opportunity presents itself. She shook out her cloak and hung it on the peg by the door, where it began to drip quietly onto the stone floor. Mr. Halbrook made a mental note to put down a cloth later, though he suspected he would forget, as he always did, and simply wipe up the small puddle before closing for the evening. "I've come for my usual order," Mrs. Ashworth said, turning to survey the shelves with the air of one who has time to spare and intends to enjoy spending it, though I confess I'm in no great hurry. The children have their geography examination this afternoon, and Mr. Palmer is proctoring. I have a blessed hour of freedom before I need to return. "Then you must have tea," Mr. Halbrook said decisively. "The kettle is already hot, and I was just thinking how pleasant a cup would be." It was a small fiction. This, he had not been thinking of tea at all, but it was the sort of fiction that smoothed the social path, that allowed one to offer hospitality without making the other feel they were imposing. Mrs. Ashworth understood this perfectly well, and she smiled in acknowledgement of the gentle dance they were performing. "Tea would be most welcome," she said. "Thank you." Mr. Halbrook retreated to the small back room where he kept his personal things: a tin for tea, a small spirit kettle, 2 cups that had belonged to his mother, their porcelain so fine that light showed through when they were held up to a candle. He prepared the tea with the same careful attention he brought to his candle making, warming the pot, measuring the leaves, waiting for the water to reach the precise moment between boiling and cooling when tea was best made. When he returned to the shop, Mrs. Ashworth had settled herself on the chair he kept near the counter for those customers who wished to sit while they made their selections or discussed their orders. She had removed her gloves and was holding her hands out to the warmth radiating from the candles that burned throughout the shop. "It's always so wonderfully warm in here," she said as he handed her a cup of tea. "Even on the coldest days, one steps through your door and feels immediately comforted." "Candlelight carries warmth in more ways than one," Mr. Halbrook said, settling himself on his stool. "Though I confess the shop does stay warmer than one might expect. The workshop especially, all that melted wax, all those small flames. It's quite pleasant in winter." They sipped their tea in comfortable silence for a moment, the kind of silence that can exist only between people who have known each other long enough that conversation is a choice rather than an obligation. Through the window, the rain continued its gentle percussion against the glass. The street outside was largely empty, only the occasional hurried figure passing by, head down against the weather. The world seemed to have drawn in upon itself, seeking shelter and warmth, content to wait out the rain in whatever safe harbor it could find. "I've been thinking about candlelight," Mrs. Ashworth said eventually, her voice reflective. "Teaching the children about the invention of the gas lamp last week, and of course, they find it all terribly exciting, this modern world of ours, but I found myself rather sad, thinking about what we're losing." Mr. Halbrook nodded slowly. He had thought similar thoughts many times, though he tried not to dwell on them overmuch. Progress was coming, as it always did, and one could not stop it any more than one could stop the rain or the turning of the seasons. "Candlelight has a quality to it," Mrs. Ashworth continued, "a gentleness that these bright gas flames lack. When I was a child, we read by candlelight every evening. My father would light the candles one by one, and it was like a signal. The day's work was done. The night's peace had begun. There was something sacred about it, I think. Something that marked the transition from labor to rest." "There is an honesty to candlelight," Mr. Halbrook said quietly. "It doesn't pretend to be stronger than it is. It illuminates what is near and leaves the far corners in shadow. It reminds us that we cannot see everything, know everything, control everything, and there is a comfort in that, I find." Ashworth looked at him with the expression of someone who has heard a truth they already knew but had not known how to articulate. "Yes," she said softly. "Yes, exactly that." They sat together in the warm glow of the shop, two old friends sharing tea and thoughts, while outside the world rushed past in the rain. Here, time seemed to pool like candle wax, accumulating slowly, creating something solid and real from what had been liquid and formless. The children love candles. "Still," Mrs. Ashworth said after a moment, "at Christmas, when we light the ones on our classroom tree, they become quite reverent. Even the rowdiest boys fall silent. There's something about a candle flame that speaks to something deep in us, I think. Something ancient and essential." "Fire was our first technology," Mr. Halbrook observed. "Before tools, before language perhaps. The first thing we learned to carry with us, to create on demand. Light and warmth and safety, all in one small flame. We've been watching fires burn for as long as we've been human. It's no wonder it still speaks to us." "You're quite the philosopher, Mr. Halbrook," Mrs. Ashworth said with a gentle smile. "Not at all," he replied, a little embarrassed. "Merely an old man who has spent too much time alone with his thoughts and his candles. I think perhaps candles make philosophers of us all," Mrs. Ashworth said. They burn quietly and steadily, and they invite us to do the same. The conversation drifted then to other matters: how the winter term was progressing, which students showed promise, how Mrs. Ashworth's sister in Durham was recovering from her illness. They spoke of the preparations being made for Christmas, of the decorations that would go up in the streets, of the services that would be held at the cathedral. Mr. Halbrook found himself mentioning, almost without meaning to, the candle on the high shelf, the one that burned longer than it ought. He had not spoken of it to anyone before, and he was surprised to hear the words coming from his own mouth. Mrs. Ashworth listened with interest, her head tilted slightly to one side, her expression thoughtful but not skeptical. "Perhaps," she said when he had finished, "it's the shop's way of holding on to something. Memory, maybe, or hope, or just the simple pleasure of burning a bit longer than expected." Mr. Halbrook considered this. "That's a nicer explanation than most I've considered." "Everything deserves a nice explanation if we can manage it," Mrs. Ashworth said firmly. "The world is mysterious enough without us making it darker than it needs to be." They finished their tea as the church bells tolled noon, the sound rolling across the rooftops and in through the shop window, marking the passage of time in that old familiar way that had been marking it since long before either of them had been born. Mrs. Ashworth rose, straightening her skirts and reaching for her gloves. "I suppose I must return to my duties. Mr. Palmer will be wondering where I've gotten to." "Your usual order?" Mr. Halbrook asked, standing as well. "Yes, please." The bell chimed as she left, its voice bright and clear. Through the window, Mr. Halbrook watched her make her way down the street, the parcel tucked under her arm, her step light despite the puddles. The shop seemed quieter after she had gone, but it was not an empty quiet. It was the quiet of a space that had just held friendship, that still bore the warmth of shared company. Mr. Halbrook collected the teacups and returned them to their shelf, then stood for a moment in the center of his shop, surrounded by candles, surrounded by light. Outside, the rain was indeed easing, and somewhere above the clouds, the winter sun was trying to break through. He returned to his workbench and sat down, his hands coming to rest on the piece of wood he had been carving the previous afternoon. A bear's head, still rough, requiring much more work before it would be ready for painting. He picked up his carving knife, but did not immediately begin to work. Instead, he held it quietly, thinking about all the toys this knife had helped to create over the years, all the small wooden forms it had helped to coax forth from blocks of lime or cherry or oak. His father's hands had guided this knife before his own. His father had carved with it, had shaped toy after toy, had invested each one with care and attention. And now Mr. Bellamy's hands performed the same work, following the same principles, creating for a new generation of children the same kinds of companions his father had created for an earlier generation. There was comfort in this continuity, in being part of a tradition that stretched backward and forward through time. He was not merely an individual craftsman working in isolation. He was a link in a chain, receiving skills and knowledge from those who had come before and passing them on, if only through the toys themselves, to those who would come after. What would become of his workshop when he was gone? He had no children to inherit it, no apprentice to carry on the work. Likely the shop would be cleared out, his tools sold or discarded, his remaining stock of toys distributed somehow. The building would be taken over by some other business, and the long history of toy making in this location would come to an end. The thought saddened him, but only mildly. Everything ended eventually. Workshops closed, traditions faded, skills were lost or transformed. This was the nature of time, of change of the world's constant movement forward. He had done his work, had made his toys, had contributed what he could contribute. That would have to be enough. And yet, some of his toys would survive him, would continue to exist and be played with and loved. In that sense, something of him would persist. Not his name, perhaps, not his identity, but his care, his craftsmanship, the love he had invested in his work. These things would endure in the toys themselves, invisible but present, a kind of gift given to children he would never meet, in times he would never see. Mr. Bellamy lifted his knife and began to work on the bear's head, the blade moving in its familiar rhythms, the wood shavings beginning to accumulate on the bench before him. As he carved, his mind grew quiet, focused on the immediate task, on the feel of the wood and the angle of the blade. But beneath that focused attention, beneath the conscious thought required by the work, there ran a current of deeper feeling, a sense of connection to all the other toy makers who had ever lived, all the other craftspeople who had devoted their lives to creating things of beauty and utility for others. He was not alone. Even in his solitary workshop, he was part of something larger, something that transcended individual lives and connected hands across time. The morning light grew gradually brighter, the street sounds increased, the day began in earnest, and Mr. Arthur Bellamy worked on, his hands shaping wood, his mind holding gently the awareness of memory and meaning, creating with patience and care the small wooden companions that would carry forward, in their quiet way, into an unknown future. The Toy Maker of Covent Garden. Part 7. Evening light in the workshop. The afternoon had worn on in its quiet way, and now the light was changing, taking on the particular quality that comes in the hour before sunset. Mr. Bellamy paused in his work and looked toward the window, where the gray sky of morning had transformed into something softer. Warmer bands of pale gold and rose visible between the rooftops, the clouds catching the fading sun and holding its light like precious things cupped in careful hands. He set down the small paintbrush he had been using. He had been adding delicate details to a toy theater, tiny flowers painted on the proscenium arch, and rose from his stool, moving to the window to better see the sky. The street outside was quieter now than it had been earlier in the day. The market had closed, the vendors had packed their barrows and gone home, and only a few pedestrians remained, hurrying toward their own suppers and firesides. The light from the setting sun slanted through the window at a low angle, illuminating the dust motes that drifted through the air and casting long shadows across the workshop floor. It touched the toys on their shelves, making the painted surfaces glow softly, bringing out depths of color that had not been visible in the flat light of midday. A wooden horse caught the light and seemed almost to shimmer. A row of tin soldiers stood in formation, their painted uniforms brilliant for this brief moment before the light faded entirely. Mr. Bellamy stood at the window, simply watching as the sky continued its slow transformation. This was one of his favorite times of day, this transition from afternoon to evening, when the world grew quiet and the light became beautiful, and there was a sense of things settling, of the day's work drawing toward its close. Behind him, the lamps in his workshop glowed steadily, their warm yellow light a counterpoint to the cooler light from outside. He had lit them an hour ago, when the afternoon had begun to dim, and now they created a space of warmth and comfort that felt increasingly separate from the darkening street beyond the window. The workshop was becoming an island of light, a haven against the approaching night. He turned from the window and surveyed his domain. The workbench held the projects he had been engaged with throughout the day, the toy theater with its half-painted flowers, a set of building blocks awaiting their final coat of varnish, a partially carved figure that would eventually become a shepherd for a nativity scene. Each piece represented hours of careful work, and each would require more hours still before it was complete. But there was no hurry. The work would be there tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. Mr. Bellamy moved to the small spirit stove in the corner and set the kettle to boil for his evening tea. This, too, was part of the ritual of his days. This pause, as afternoon became evening. This moment of rest and reflection before the final hours of work that would carry him to closing time. While the water heated, he tidied his workbench, arranging tools, wiping down surfaces, sweeping the accumulated wood shavings and paint scrapings into his dustpan. The workshop was never completely clean. Sawdust seemed to generate itself, appearing in corners and crevices no matter how often he swept. But he liked to maintain a certain level of order to ensure that his workspace was ready for the next day's labor. The kettle began to sing, its whistle soft and almost musical, in the quiet workshop. Mr. Bellamy prepared his tea with the same methodical care he brought to all his tasks, warming the pot, measuring the leaves, pouring the water, allowing it to steep while he fetched a cup and saucer from the small shelf where he kept such things. He poured the tea when it was ready, added a small amount of milk from the jug he had brought down from his rooms that morning, and carried the cup to his chair near the fire. The fire had burned low during the afternoon, and he added a few pieces of coal to it now, watching as they caught and began to glow, sending up small flames that danced and flickered in the grate. Settling into his chair, tea in hand, Mr. Bellamy allowed himself to simply sit for a while, doing nothing, thinking nothing in particular, merely existing in this moment of quietness and rest. Outside, the sunset continued its slow progression, the colors in the sky deepening from pale gold and rose to richer shades of amber and crimson. The street lamps were being lit. He could see the lamplighter passing by, his familiar figure bent to his task, each lamp blooming into light as he touched it with his long pole. The sounds from outside were fading now. A cart rumbled past, its wheels making their familiar rumble on the cobblestones. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolled the hour. 6 chimes, clear and measured. A dog barked, the sound carrying in the cooling air, but these sounds were growing fewer, softer, as if the city itself were settling down for the evening, drawing breath before the night. Mr. Bellamy sipped his tea and felt the warmth spread through him. The day had been a good one, not remarkable, not particularly eventful, but good in the way that simple days of honest work are good. He had made progress on several projects, had kept his workspace in order, had tended to the small details that required attention. There was satisfaction in this, in the accumulation of small accomplishments, in the steady forward movement of his craft. The fire crackled softly, sending shadows dancing across the ceiling. The lamps burned with their steady, unwavering light. The toys on their shelves stood silent and patient, each one holding its particular character, its own small presence. The rocking horse seemed poised to move if only someone would climb onto its back. The dolls sat or stood in various attitudes, their painted faces serene. The soldiers maintained their eternal formation, ready for campaigns that would be fought only in imagination. Mr. Bellamy thought about all the evenings he had spent in this chair, in this workshop, over all the years of his working life. Thousands of evenings, each one much like this one, each one bringing its own particular quality of light and shadow, its own configuration of sounds from the street outside, its own texture of thoughts and feelings, and yet each one unique, unrepeatable, a moment that would come once and never again. There was something both melancholy and comforting in this awareness. Melancholy because it was a reminder of time's passage, of the way days accumulated into years and years into a lifetime, of the fact that he was old now and would not have infinitely many more such evenings. Comforting because it made each evening precious, made this moment of sitting with his tea by the fire something to be appreciated, to be fully inhabited rather than rushed through on the way to something else. He finished his tea and set the cup aside, then simply sat, watching the fire, listening to the quiet sounds of the workshop, the soft ticking of the clock, the occasional settling of coals in the grate, the faint creaking of the building as it adjusted to the cooling evening air. The sky outside had darkened further now, the sunset colors fading into deep blue and purple. The street lamps provided the primary illumination, their light making small pools on the pavement, leaving the spaces between in shadow. A few people still passed by, their figures briefly visible as they moved through the lamplight, then disappearing again into darkness. Mr. Bellamy rose from his chair and moved about the workshop, adjusting a lamp here, straightening a tool there, his movements slow and contemplative. He paused before the shelf where the cloth doll and his childhood soldier stood together and reached up to adjust the doll's faded blue dress, which had become slightly disarranged. The doll's painted face looked back at him, peaceful and patient, and he felt a surge of affection for this old toy that had survived so much, that held within its worn fabric such a weight of memory and meaning. "Good evening," he said softly to the doll and to the soldier beside it, and perhaps to all the other toys on all the other shelves, each one waiting for its moment, each one ready to bring joy or comfort to whatever child would eventually claim it. He returned to his workbench and took up the toy theater again, examining it in the lamplight. The painted flowers on the proscenium arch were nearly complete. A few more touches, and they would be finished. He picked up his smallest brush, dipped it carefully in paint, and began to add the final details, working slowly and precisely, his hand steady despite his years. As he worked, the evening deepened into night. The last traces of sunset faded from the sky. The street outside grew quieter still, the sounds becoming more occasional, more distant. Inside the workshop, the lamps burned on, creating a warm cocoon of light against the darkness beyond the windows. Mr. Bellamy worked without hurrying, adding tiny touches of color to the theater's painted decorations, losing himself in the meditative rhythm of the work. The brush moved across the wood surface with delicate precision, leaving behind trails of paint that caught the lamplight and glowed softly. Each stroke was deliberate, considered, the product of years of practice, and an attention that had become almost instinctive. Time passed, marked only by the steady ticking of the clock and the gradual transformation of the toy theater from nearly finished to complete. When the last flower was painted and the last detail added, Mr. Bellamy set down his brush and held the theater up to the light, turning it slowly, examining his work from all angles. It was good. The proportions were correct. The painting was careful and precise. The whole piece had the quality of rightness that came when craft and care combined successfully. Some child would receive this theater and would put on plays with it, would create stories and performances, would populate its small stage with imagination and wonder. He set the theater aside to dry and cleaned his brushes carefully, washing away the paint with turpentine and then water, drying them on a soft cloth, returning them to their jar. The workbench was tidied, tools put away, surfaces wiped clean. The day's work was done. Mr. Bellamy stood in the center of his workshop, looking around at the space that had been the center of his life for so many years. The lamps cast their warm light across familiar surfaces. The fire had settled into a steady glow. The toys on their shelves waited patiently. And outside, beyond the windows, the night had fully arrived, wrapping the city in darkness, while here, in this small shop in Covent Garden, warmth and light persisted, a small refuge against the dark. He felt peaceful, content, ready for the evening's remaining hours and whatever they might bring. The day had been good, the work had been satisfying, and now the night was here, bringing with it the promise of rest and the certainty that tomorrow would bring another day, another morning, another opportunity to continue the quiet work of creating small vessels of joy from wood and paint and imagination. Part 8. A Visitor from Long Ago. The next afternoon brought with it a visitor that Mr. Bellamy had not expected, though in truth he welcomed very few visitors and expected even fewer. He was at his workbench, engaged in the delicate work of attaching the tiny brass hinges to a wooden music box, when he heard the soft tapping at his door. 3 gentle knocks, patient and unhurried. He set down his tools and rose, crossing the workshop to answer. When he opened the door, he found standing there an elderly woman, perhaps a few years younger than himself, dressed in clothing that spoke of genteel poverty, good fabric, and careful maintenance, but styles that were no longer quite fashionable, colors that had faded with many washings. Her face was deeply lined but kind, and her eyes held a quality of gentle determination mixed with uncertainty. "Mr. Bellamy?" she asked, her voice soft and cultured. "I hope I am not intruding. I wonder if I might speak with you for a few moments." "Of course," Mr. Bellamy said, stepping back to allow her entrance. "Please, do come in. How may I be of service to you?" The woman entered slowly, looking around the workshop with an expression that seemed to combine nostalgia with something approaching wonder. "It has been many years since I was last in this shop," she said quietly. "Many years indeed. I was not certain I would find it still here, still unchanged." Mr. Bellamy studied her face, trying to place her, but the memory would not come. "I apologize," he said. "I fear my memory is not what it once was. Have we met before?" "We have," the woman said, "though it was a very long time ago. More than 20 years, I should think. My name is Mary Thornton then. I am Mrs. Mary Ashford now, these past 15 years. But you would have known me as Mary Thornton." Mary Thornton. The name stirred something in Mr. Bellamy's memory, a distant recognition. And then, quite suddenly, understanding came. "You are the daughter of Mrs. Millicent Thornton," he said softly. "The first Mary." The woman's eyes widened slightly. "You remember?" she said, her voice touched with emotion. "After all these years, you remember." "I remember your mother bringing a doll to be repaired," Mr. Bellamy said. "A cloth doll in a blue dress. She said it had been yours when you were a child and that your daughter, also named Mary, had inherited it and loved it dearly." Mrs. Ashford nodded, tears beginning to gather in her eyes. "Yes," she said. "Yes, that is right. My daughter Mary. She died when she was 8 years old. Not long after my mother brought the doll here for repair, a fever that came suddenly and could not be broken. It has been more than 20 years now, but she paused, pressing her lips together, composing herself. Time softens the grief, but it never quite removes it. I am so very sorry, Mr. Bellamy said gently. Please, come and sit down. May I offer you some tea? Mrs. Ashford accepted gratefully, and Mr. Bellamy busied himself with preparing tea while his visitor settled into the chair near the fire. As the water heated, he found himself thinking about the connections between the past and present, about how lives touched and separated, and sometimes, unexpectedly, touched again. When the tea was ready, he poured 2 cups and carried them to the fireside, settling into the second chair with a slight sigh of relief. His knees had been bothering him today, and sitting was more comfortable than standing. I have thought about this shop many times over the years, Mrs. Ashford said, accepting her tea with a small nod of thanks. After my daughter died, my mother brought the doll back to you. She could not bear to keep it, you see. Every time she saw it, she thought of Mary, and the pain was too great. She asked if you would keep it here, and you agreed, out of kindness. I have always remembered that kindness. It was a small thing, Mr. Bellamy said. Your mother was grieving. How could I refuse such a request? Many would have, Mrs. Ashford said, but you did not. And now, well, I have come to ask about the doll. My mother died 3 years ago, and before she passed, she spoke of it. She said she had been wrong to give it away, that it should have remained in the family, that it held too much memory to be abandoned. She asked me to try to retrieve it if it still existed. I know it is a great deal to ask after so many years, but I wondered. Mr. Bellamy set down his teacup and rose. He crossed to the shelf where the cloth doll stood beside his childhood soldier and carefully lifted it down. He carried it back to Mrs. Ashford and held it out to her. It is here, he said simply. It has been waiting. Mrs. Ashford took the doll with trembling hands, and the tears that had been gathering in her eyes spilled over. She held the doll close to her chest, much as a child might hold it, and wept quietly for several moments. Mr. Bellamy sat in respectful silence, allowing her the space to feel what she needed to feel. When she had composed herself, Mrs. Ashford looked at the doll more carefully, examining it as one might examine an old friend, not seen in many years. It is exactly as I remember, she said wonderingly. The blue dress, the painted face, the yarn hair. I made this doll myself, you know, when I was perhaps 14 or 15. I was learning to sew, and my mother suggested I make a doll as practice. I remember choosing the fabric for the dress, painting the face with such care, and then I gave it to my own daughter when she was small, and she loved it just as I had loved it. It shows the signs of much love, Mr. Bellamy said gently. That is the best thing one can say about a toy. Mrs. Ashford nodded, running her fingers over the doll's faded dress. I embroidered my initials on the back, she said. M.T. Mary Thornton, as I was then. I wanted to mark it as mine, to claim it somehow. How foolish and how young I was. We all wish to leave our mark, to say I was here, I made this, I mattered. There was nothing foolish in that. Mr. Bellamy walked her to the door, moving slowly, feeling the weight of the day and the years in his bones. At the threshold, Mrs. Ashford paused and turned to him. We live such brief lives, she said quietly, and yet the things we make, the love we give, these can endure. My mother made this doll for me. I gave it to my daughter. Now I give it to my granddaughter. And perhaps someday she will give it to her own daughter. The people may pass away, but the love remains, held in cloth and paint and memory. That is a beautiful thought, Mr. Bellamy said. I hope it proves true. They said their farewells, and Mr. Bellamy watched from the doorway as Mrs. Ashford made her way down the street, the basket with its precious contents held carefully in her hands. She walked slowly but with evident purpose, and he continued watching until she turned the corner and disappeared from view. He closed the door and returned to his workshop, feeling a mixture of emotions he could not quite name. Sadness for the loss of the doll, which had become a familiar presence during its years on his shelf, but also deep satisfaction that it was returning to the family that had created it, that it would know the hands of another child, that its story would continue. He looked at the shelf where the doll had stood, now holding only his childhood soldier. The soldier seemed somehow lonely without its companion, standing at attention in solitary vigil. Mr. Bellamy reached up and adjusted the soldier's position slightly, turning it so that it faced outward toward the workshop rather than toward the wall. "You are the keeper of memories now," he said softly to the small wooden figure. "You must remember for both of you." The afternoon continued its quiet progression toward evening, and Mr. Bellamy returned to his work, his hands taking up familiar tools, his mind holding gently the awareness that he had been witness to something significant, not grand or dramatic, but meaningful in the way that small acts of preservation and return are meaningful, in the way that connections across time and loss can sometimes be unexpectedly restored. Outside, the street grew gradually darker, the sounds of commerce fading into the quieter sounds of evening. Inside, the lamps burned steadily, the fire glowed in its grate, and the work continued, patient and unhurried, as it had for decades and would continue for as long as strength remained. Life moved in its cycles, loss and recovery, separation and reunion, endings and beginnings. And through it all, the small things persisted. A wooden soldier on a shelf, a cloth doll returning home, the steady work of hands creating toys for children who would love them, lose them, remember them, and perhaps, if fortune smiled, find them again when they were most needed. Part 9. Closing the workshop. The evening had settled fully over Covent Garden by the time Mr. Bellamy began his preparations for closing the shop. The clock on the mantelpiece showed 7:30, and though there was work he could still do, there was also the recognition that his body was tired, that his eyes were growing weary from the close work of the day, that it was time to bring this day to its conclusion and allow himself the rest he had earned. He stood in the center of his workshop, looking around at the familiar space with the appreciation that comes from long association. The lamps cast their warm light across the workbench, across the shelves of toys, across the tools that hung on their pegs or rested in their designated places. Everything was much as it had been that morning, and yet subtly different. The work had progressed. Pieces had moved from one stage of completion to the next. The day had left its mark in small ways. Mr. Bellamy began with the fire, as he always did. It had burned low during the evening, and now consisted mostly of glowing coals and fine ash. He took the poker and carefully spread the coals evenly across the grate, then covered them with ash from the bucket, enough to bank the fire safely, to preserve a small core of heat that could be revived in the morning, but not so much as to completely smother it. The fire's light dimmed as he worked, the red glow gradually being obscured by the gray ash, until only the faintest suggestion of warmth remained visible. Next, he turned his attention to his workbench. The music box he had been working on earlier lay there, its tiny brass hinges now properly attached, waiting only for its mechanism to be installed. He examined it once more in the lamplight, checking that the hinges moved smoothly, that the joints were secure, that everything was as it should be. Satisfied, he set it aside carefully, placing it on a shelf where it would be safe until he could return to it tomorrow. The rest of the workbench required tidying. He gathered the small brass screws that had not been used and returned them to their compartmented box. The screwdriver was wiped clean and returned to its place in the tool rack. The fine sandpaper he had used to smooth the wood around the hinges was folded neatly and set aside for future use. Each action was deliberate, unhurried, part of the ritual that marked the transition from work to rest. He moved methodically around the workshop, attending to each area in turn. The paintbrushes were checked to ensure they had been properly cleaned. He had washed them earlier, but it was his habit to check again, for a brush left with dried paint in its bristles was a brush ruined. He found them all clean and soft, standing in their jar like a small forest of wooden handles and fine bristles. The pots of paint were examined to ensure their lids were tight. He had learned long ago that paint left exposed to air would dry and become useless, and he was meticulous about sealing each pot after use. He found one lid that was slightly loose and tightened it, then arranged all the pots in their proper order on the shelf: reds and blues and yellows and greens and browns, each one labeled in his careful handwriting. The carving knives required special attention. Each one was examined for cleanliness, for any trace of wood sap or resin that might have accumulated on the blade. He found them all satisfactory, but he nevertheless wiped each one with a lightly oiled cloth, maintaining the steel, preventing rust, ensuring they would be ready when next he needed them. Then each knife was returned to its place in the wooden rack, arranged by size and purpose, the way his father had taught him, the way his grandfather had taught his father. Mr. Bellamy swept the floor next, gathering the day's accumulation of wood shavings and sawdust into a small pile, then transferring this to the wooden box where such things were kept. The shavings were soft and fragrant, carrying the scent of the various woods he had worked with: pine and basswood and cherry, each one contributing its own particular perfume to the mixture. He lifted a handful and let it fall back into the box, watching the way the curled shavings drifted and settled, light as paper, delicate as lace. When the floor was swept, he moved to the windows. The shutters had remained open during the evening, allowing him to see the darkening street, but now it was time to close them, to seal the workshop against the night. He unlatched each shutter and swung it inward, the hinges creaking slightly, a sound so familiar he hardly noticed it, yet comforting in its consistency. The shutters were heavy, made of solid wood, and they closed out the world effectively, reducing the workshop to its own private domain, dependent only on the light of its lamps. With the shutters closed and latched, the workshop felt smaller, more intimate, like a room in a house rather than a place of business. Mr. Bellamy stood for a moment in the changed atmosphere, appreciating this transformation, the sense of enclosure and safety. He began to extinguish the lamps, starting with the one farthest from the door and working his way forward. Each lamp required its own small ritual: the glass chimney to be lifted carefully, the wick to be lowered until the flame diminished and went out, the chimney to be replaced, the whole lamp to be left tidy for the morning. As each lamp was extinguished, the workshop grew dimmer, the shadows deepening, the pools of light becoming fewer and smaller. He left one lamp burning, the one nearest the door, and by its light he made a final circuit of the workshop, checking that everything was in order, that nothing had been overlooked. His eyes moved over the shelves of toys, each one standing or sitting in its place, patient and still. The rocking horse with its real horsehair mane, the set of 9 pins painted in bright colors, the Noah's Ark with its procession of tiny animals, the soldiers in their formation, the dolls in their various dresses. His gaze came to rest on the shelf where his childhood soldier stood alone now, the cloth doll having been reclaimed by its family. The soldier seemed to stand even more at attention than usual, bearing its solitude with dignity. Mr. Bellamy reached up and touched the small wooden figure gently, just for a moment, a gesture of acknowledgement and affection. "Good night, old friend," he said softly. "Stand watch over the others while I am upstairs." He moved to his desk and checked his account book, ensuring that the day's transactions had been properly recorded. There had been few. A customer had collected a repaired top in the morning, and another had commissioned a set of building blocks to be completed by next week. But each was noted in his careful handwriting, with the date and details and amounts. The ledger was closed and returned to its drawer. The cash box was checked, the day's modest receipts counted and found correct. He locked the box and placed it in the drawer of his desk, then locked the drawer itself, tucking the small key into his waistcoat pocket, where it lived alongside his watch. Everything was attended to now. Everything was in order. The workshop was ready for the night, prepared to rest until morning should call it back to wakefulness. At the top of the stairs, he paused and looked back down at the closed door of his workshop. Behind that door, the toys waited in darkness. The fire held its small core of warmth. The day's work stood ready for tomorrow's continuation. All was well. All was as it should be. Mr. Arthur Bellamy turned away from the stairs and moved toward his rooms, towards supper and reading, and eventually sleep, carrying with him the quiet contentment of honest work, completed, of tools properly tended, of a workshop left in perfect order, ready to receive the gift of another morning when it should come. Part 10. When the toys grow quiet. In the deep hours of the night, when the city had settled into its quietest time, and even the sounds of distant revelry had faded to nothing, the toy workshop of Mr. Arthur Bellamy rested in a stillness so complete it seemed to exist outside the ordinary passage of time. The shutters were closed against the darkness beyond, admitting no light from the street lamps, no glimmer from the moon, if moon there was. The lamps had all been extinguished, their wicks cold, their chimneys dark. The fire in the grate had subsided to the merest whisper of warmth, the coals beneath their blanket of ash holding only the faintest suggestion of the heat that had filled the room during the day. In this darkness, the workshop held its own particular quality of presence. It was not the absence of things, not emptiness, but rather a fullness waiting in stillness, the patient presence of tools and toys, of wood and paint and cloth, of all the accumulated evidence of careful work and devoted craft. If there had been eyes to see, they would have perceived only shapes. The bulk of the workbench against one wall, the shelves rising toward the ceiling on all sides, the chair near the fireplace holding its form in the darkness. But the toys themselves were invisible, reduced to their essential existence, freed for these hours from the need to be seen or admired or played with. They simply were, existing in their own right, waiting with the patience that only inanimate things possess. The wooden soldier stood on his high shelf, one arm raised in eternal salute, his painted uniform now invisible in the darkness, but no less present for being unseen. He had stood thus for more than 60 years, had witnessed the passage of days and seasons and decades, had kept his vigil through all the changes that time had brought, and he would stand thus still, bearing his memories with silent dignity, holding close the knowledge of the child who had loved him and the man that child had become. Around him, on other shelves, his companions waited. The rocking horse stood frozen mid-gallop, its horsehair mane stirring very slightly in the imperceptible currents of air that moved through the workshop, even in stillness. The dolls sat or stood in their various poses, their painted faces serene in the darkness. The Noah's Ark held its cargo of tiny animals, each one carved with care, each one waiting to be discovered by some child who would give them names and voices and adventures. The tin soldiers maintained their formation, lined up in perfect rows, ready for campaigns that existed only in imagination. The building blocks sat stacked in their box, each one precisely cut and sanded, waiting to be built into towers and walls and castles. The mechanical bear with its wind-up key stood motionless, its mechanism still, but ready to lumber forward at the turn of a key and the touch of a child's hand. Each toy held within itself the potential for joy, for imagination, for the particular magic that happens when a child takes an object and transforms it through play into something alive, something meaningful, something beloved. But for now, in these deep night hours, they rested in their essential nature. Wood and cloth and paint and metal, shaped by human hands, imbued with care, waiting for their purpose to be activated. The darkness was not empty of sound, not quite. There was the soft ticking of the clock on the mantelpiece, so steady and regular it became almost inaudible, more a pulse than a sound, marking time in increments so small they seemed meaningless individually, but which, accumulated, made hours and days and lives. There was the occasional settling of the building itself, the wood beams adjusting to the night's cold, producing tiny creaks and sighs that spoke of age and endurance. And beneath these sounds, beneath even the threshold of hearing, there might have been something else. Not a sound exactly, but a quality of presence that suggested the breathing of things that do not breathe. The quiet existence of objects that have been made with love and care, that hold within themselves the intentions of their maker and the anticipation of being loved by those for whom they were made. Above the workshop, in his small rooms, Mr. Bellamy slept the sleep of exhaustion and contentment, his breathing slow and regular, his old body resting from the day's labors. Perhaps he dreamed of toys and children, of wood and paint, of his father's hands teaching his own, of all the years of work that stretched behind him and the uncertain future that lay ahead. Or perhaps he dreamed of nothing at all, simply floating in that deep place of unconsciousness where the mind releases its grip and allows itself to drift, unmoored from worry or thought. In the street outside, London, too, was sleeping, or mostly sleeping. A cat moved silently along the pavement, intent on some nocturnal errand. A constable made his rounds, his footsteps echoing in the empty street, his lantern casting a small circle of light that moved with him and then passed on, leaving darkness in its wake. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolled the hour, two low, solemn notes that spread through the darkness and faded, acknowledged by the night and then absorbed into its silence. Part 10, Farewell at Dawn. You wake before the light for the first time. The porthole window is still dark. Not the deep dark of midnight, but the particular dark that comes just before dawn, when the night has said everything it has to say and is waiting now, quietly, for what comes next. The lighthouse beam is still turning. You can see it in the way the darkness shifts above you, that slow brightening and releasing, the pulse of it, faithful as breathing. You lie still and listen. The sea, always the sea, patient and unceasing, speaking its low and rhythmic language to the cliff below, the mechanism in the tower above, its hum traveling down through the stone. Somewhere outside, a single bird. You do not know which kind, only that its note is clear and rising and entirely untroubled. A small bright sound in the vast quiet of the pre-dawn. It calls once, and then again, and then the silence reassembles itself around it, deeper for having been broken. You do not want to get up, not because you are unwilling to leave. You know that you must, that the life waiting for you is your life, and it is asking for you back, gently but clearly. But because this room, this curved stone room with its porthole window and its quilts and the hum of the turning lens above has become, in a very short time, something that feels like an old belonging, a place you did not know you needed until you had it. You want to stay in it a little longer, to breathe it a few more times. So you do. You lie in the warm dark and breathe and listen and let yourself be here fully for these last unhurried minutes. The quilts hold you. The stone holds the quilts. The headland holds the stone. The sea holds the headland, as it has always held it, shaped it, made it what it is. You hold all of it, too, in your own small way, in memory, which is the only way any of us can hold a place once we have left it. The window begins to change. It happens so gradually that you cannot point to the moment it begins. Only notice, at some point, that the dark has softened, that where there was nothing there is now a very faint suggestion of color, a lightening at the edge of the sky that is less a color than an intimation of one. Pewter becoming gray, becoming very slowly the first pale intimation of blue. You watch it and feel the way dawn always makes you feel when you are awake to receive it properly, as if something is being given, as if the world is beginning again, as it always does, and as it always will, long after any of us are here to watch. You rise. Edric is already in the kitchen, of course. He is standing at the stove, as he was that very first morning, with his back to you and his tea in his hand, looking out the window at the sea which is, this morning, extraordinary. The dawn light catching it at the lowest possible angle, turning the water to hammered copper and rose gold. The swells moving through it slowly, each one a slightly different shade of the same warm color. You stand in the doorway for a moment and look at his back, at his white hair, at the set of his shoulders, at the particular quality of stillness he carries everywhere with him like a second coat, and you feel something that is mostly gratitude and partly grief, the small, clean grief of leaving something good. He hears you, as he always hears you, without turning. "Good morning," he says, and then, "Look at it today." "I'm looking," you say. He turns then and sees your face, and his own face does something quiet and knowing, and he nods once, slowly, and pours you a cup of tea. You sit at the kitchen table together for the last time. The breakfast is simple: bread and butter and a soft-boiled egg, but kind of breakfast that is perfect in its plainness, that needs nothing added to it. You eat slowly, The copper light on the water shifts gradually toward gold as the sun lifts itself clear of the horizon and the sea changes again, becoming bluer, more itself. The dawn colors, releasing it back to its daytime character. The lighthouse beam, which has been turning through the night, fades now into the growing light, not turning off, just becoming invisible. As it does each morning, its work for the night completed. The bird outside calls again. More of them now, a small chorus assembling itself in the cliff grass, tuning up for the day. "You have everything?" Edric asks eventually. You think of the amber sea glass in your jacket pocket, the green piece from the second day on the beach, the smooth gray stone, perfect and dark, the compass, wrapped in a cloth and placed carefully in the inner pocket of your bag, where you will feel it against your chest as you walk. "Everything," you say. He walks you to the gate. The yard is bright with morning now, the low sun striking the lighthouse tower and turning the old gray stone almost golden. And above it, still, always turning. The lantern room catches the light and throws it back in long prismatic flashes that travel across the yard and over the gate and out along the coastal path ahead of you. The grass on either side of the path is beaded with dew, each drop holding its own tiny sun, and the air is cool and clean and carries with it the smell of the sea and the low-growing herbs between the path stones and something else, something that might simply be the smell of a morning that is fully itself. At the gate, you stop and turn. Edric stands a few feet back, his hands in the pockets of the storm cloud sweater, his white hair lifting slightly in the morning breeze. He looks at you with the expression you have come to know and will not forget. Warm and knowing and gentle and entirely without need of anything from you beyond what you have already given, which is simply your presence, your attention, your willingness to be here. "Safe travels," he says. His voice is the same as it always is, low and unhurried, roughened by salt air, carrying in it all the weather of his long and faithful years on this headland. "Thank you," you say. And as before, the words carry more than they can contain. But he receives all of it. You can see that the way he receives everything, quietly, completely, without making more of it than it is, or less. You reach into your inner pocket and feel the compass there, its brass warm now, already part of you. "I'll take care of it," you say. He smiles, the slow smile beginning in the eyes. "I know you will." You turn and go through the gate. The coastal path stretches ahead of you, winding north along the clifftop, and you walk it slowly, as you have learned to walk in this place, with your eyes open and your pace matched to what is around you, rather than to any destination. The sea is to your right, enormous and blue and quietly alive, the swells moving through it with their patient, steady breathing. The cliff grass is green and damp, and the small hardy flowers among it are opening to the morning. The sea pinks and the tiny yellow things you have never learned the name of, and the occasional flash of something white and delicate that bends in the slightest wind. You walk, and the lighthouse falls behind you. You do not turn for a while, not because you don't want to. You do, deeply, but because you want to wait until the wanting is fully formed, until the moment is ready to be seen properly. You walk, and the path turns slightly, and you hear the foghorn from somewhere down the coast, one long, low note drifting up through the morning air, tender as it has always been, the sound that says, "I am here, I am here. You are not alone." Then you turn. The lighthouse stands on the headland behind you, smaller now with distance, but entirely clear in the morning light. The old gray tower rising from the cliff, the lantern room at its top catching the sun, and the beam still turning, invisible in the daylight, but turning as it always turns, as it turned through the night just past and will turn through the night to come. At the base of the tower, the cottage, its windows catching the light, the low stone wall, the gate, Edric is still there, a small figure now, at this distance, but unmistakable. The white hair, the storm cloud sweater, the hands in the pockets, the stillness. He is watching you go, and something in the fact of that he has stayed to watch, that he is still there, fills your chest with a warmth that you think will take a long time to cool. You raise one hand. After a moment, he raises his. You turn back to the path and walk on. The lighthouse grows smaller behind you as the path curves away from the headland, and the land begins to change. The open clifftop giving way to a gentler slope, the salt grass yielding to longer growth, a hedgerow appearing on the left, the first signs of the ordinary world reassembling itself around you. But you do not feel the weight of it yet. The ordinary world can wait a little longer. You are still here, still walking this path between the sea and the sky, still carrying in you everything that these days have left behind. The compass rests against your chest. The sea glass is in your pocket, smooth and cool and amber. The words are with you too, all of them. Edric's quiet words gathered over days by the fire and on the cliff and in the lantern room and on the night beach under the stars. Let it be slow. Begin again each day. The light moves through the darkness steadily, without frightening itself. If you know where north is, you can find any direction from it. These are not instructions. They are not rules. They are simply what is true, offered without urgency, available now whenever you need them, which is to say, they are yours. The path is smooth. The light is warm. The sea breathes far below, patient and eternal. In and out, the oldest rhythm, the one your own body knows. Let it carry you. Let it carry you all the way down into the soft and quiet dark, into sleep, into peace. The end. Thank you for listening. May you always know which way is north, and may the light always be turning for you, somewhere out on the water, guiding you gently home.